Hey, what's up? Happy Friday night, everybody. Back with some UFC content tonight for UFC Vegas 56. To be honest, this is not my favorite card from a betting perspective that I have seen. A lot of people have been bitching about the recent cards and the quality, and granted, there have been some low-level fights on there, but I feel like some of the other cards have been even a little bit better from a quality perspective and from a betting perspective. But we're still going to dive in, let you know what the experts, analysts have been saying this week. I'm going to give you my take on the different fights. Appreciate, like the video, subscribe. As long as we have a favorite. Daniel, good to see you. Welcome to the chat, my man. We're going to dive in and see what we can do. Hopefully we'll find some good spots. I mean, the reality is I've had cards where I didn't think it was going to be that great, and then I end up making a decent amount of money. So we'll hope that that's the case this week. That makes every UFC card better when that happens. So let's jump in and walk through these fights. So first up, we have Aaron Blanchfield versus JJ Aldrich. This is a fight that people are really high on Aaron Blanchfield. Can't tell you how. Sorry, the laughter is Shady already in the chat saying hella disrespectful lines. Yeah, he knows about me and the disrespectful lines. But on Blanchfield and Aldrich, really high on Blanchfield. A lot of people call her the truth. And, really just saying that they think that she's got a really bright future ahead of her. Only 23 years old, so definitely at an age where she can easily be improving from fight to fight. On the Aldrich side, people talk about her being pretty durable, a good all-around fighter, definitely a good boxer. I mean, that's pretty consistent. People talk about that every time that Aldrich fights. But probably not as strong on the mat, not as strong with takedowns for sure. And so people like Blanchfield's all-around game and athleticism more, but do think that Aldrich is pretty durable. The consensus on this one, just to get to it real quick, it was Blanchfield and Blanchfield decision just overwhelmingly. In terms of the outliers on this, there was one of the guys on Club and Sub, it might have been MMA Fox, or maybe it was both of the guys on there, who said at this price, they like taking a shot on Aldrich because she is being overlooked or whatever, you know how people say that shit. And so they think that her line has value here. For me, when I look at this fight, honestly, I hate this fight. I'm not really looking forward to it that much. I enjoy watching Aaron Blanchfield fights for the most part. I've been low on JJ Aldrich for a while. I don't really ever like taking her. She has some things she can do well, but I just feel like it's this plotting style that isn't all that effective. And so she's never someone that I look to bet too much. The crazy thing for me here is I do think that you can make a case that Blanchfield is being overvalued and that there's some recency bias going on there. People like to talk about that, but I think in this spot that could be the case. I mean, in her last fight, I think it was Miranda Maverick. Is that right? Sorry, I was going to have this pulled up. I'll have it here in just a second. Yeah, Miranda Maverick. So it was like everybody was on Miranda Maverick for that fight. I mean, not, obviously not everybody, but the majority. And she won a unanimous decision over Miranda Maverick, kind of put it on her some in that fight. And now she's this massive ass favorite in this fight over a reasonably good UFC fighter. So I do think that Blanchfield, I mean, I'm with everybody. I think Blanchfield is a better fighter. I think she probably wins this. It likely is a decision, but I may hedge a little bit with some Aldrich here too, just something really small because I'll probably have Blanchfield in parlays. I may also use like the overs for the parlays or the fight doesn't, or the fight does go the distance, but I may just hedge a little bit with Aldrich. I haven't done it yet, but it just feels like a line that is way too wide given these two fighters and their history. All right, that's the first one. Next up, we have Fak Radinoff. As far as comments, Shady saying maybe minus 220 to 250 is more realistic, not 540. 100% agree. Minus 540 here, I think, is a little bit crazy. All right, Fak Radinoff. You just want to keep saying that, don't you? Over and over. And then Michailidis in the next one. In terms of what people say on this one, Fak Radinoff, a pretty high pressure fighter. Most people think that he has pretty decent wrestling. There is some concern with the fact that he is 30 years old and has been a pro since 2013 and is just now getting into the UFC. Going up against Michailidis, who is known maybe above all else for his tremendous ability to gas out after 6 or 7 minutes in a fight. I heard one person talking about how in some fights he gasses so bad he can barely defend himself. And if you watch any of his fights, I did go back and watch some of each of these guys. He has some good striking and stuff. I mean, not phenomenal, but okay striking early on. But man, it feels like he starts to gas in just a few minutes. So definitely hard to trust him. Also, people do talk about the fact that Michailidis has fought up weight classes all the way up to 205, and this fight is at 170. Is it possible that that helps his gas tank at all? I don't know. But is it possible that now he's big for this weight class because of dropping down to 170? I think that's absolutely a possibility. In terms of the consensus on this fight, Fak Radinoff for sure. I mean, almost everybody that I listened to was on Fak Radinoff and Fak Radinoff inside the distance for this fight. In terms of outliers, pretty much only MMA Fox from Club and Sub liked a shot on Michailidis here. For my take here, my favorite play for this one is the fight doesn't go the distance or the unders. I do think that Michailidis is probably not going to completely shore up his gas tank just because he dropped down a weight class. I do think that he has the ability to knock Fak Radinoff out early in this fight. Fak Radinoff, if you go back and watch some of his fights, he swings his fists really wildly, and he leaves himself open to getting hit quite a bit. Michailidis has some good even spinning attacks and shit like that, where if he does land that stuff, I think it could put Fak Radinoff out. And so I think that this fight could be a little bit fast and furious in the first round. And then if we get through the first round, it may end up with Fak Radinoff getting Michailidis down and, you know, pounding him out or getting a sub or something like that. So, so I like the under. The fight doesn't go the distance. I don't mind a shot on Michailidis here, although the gas tank definitely worries me. I also don't mind a shot on Fak Radinoff round 2. I think that that could be a decent spot as well. Yeah, but I do think the fight doesn't go the distance. You'll probably see that show up in my parlays, the under. I think that's probably the best spot in this fight. Next up, we have Jeff Molina and Zalgas Zuma Gulov. This one should be a really interesting fight. A lot of good content out there this week on this one. But to sum up the main talking points for people, the keys with Jeff Molina is that he is a volume fighter. And he gets stronger as the fight goes on. So throws a lot of strikes, but he's got a really good gas tank and he doesn't crap out after a round or two. He'll keep building and building and building. He's a young guy, I think just 23 years old. So this is another guy where there absolutely can be improvements happening from fight to fight. He did get rocked in his last fight against Arichi Lang, but came through that and was able to continue putting it on him and get the win in that fight. On the Zuma Gulov side, people talk about him being a pretty well-rounded fighter, pretty durable, good kickboxer, and good kickboxing experience. In terms of the consensus on this fight, and yeah, I am moving a little faster. I drew it out a little bit too much last week. So just getting down to what people said here. In terms of the consensus on this one, surprising to me, the consensus was actually Zuma Gulov. There are more people on him than there are on Molina. As I was going through and trying to tally up the different people I heard on different sides, I would say probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% of people were on Zuma Gulov for this fight. Many of them were on him because he is an underdog here, and so they think that's a good spot. But I was kind of surprised by that because when I went back and watched some of each of these fighters, I do understand that Molina's strength of schedule has not been as strong as Zuma Gulov's, and that's something to take into consideration. But he just seems like a stronger fighter to me. And so my take on this one, I think it's certainly possible that this fight ends up looking closer than the current line. I think we're all the way up to like minus 190 or something now, unless this has come back a little bit. I should pull this up so that I can say what the case actually is. Get off of baseball here. Molina, there's a minus 180 out there. I could see it playing out closer than that. But here's the thing: in a close fight, again, we could talk about value, but I want the guy in a close fight who's going to have the higher output and the guy who's capable of building round to round and getting stronger. I definitely don't want somebody who has any chance of gassing out. And I'm not saying Zuma Gulov will, but I don't think that it's as likely that he's going to get stronger as the fight goes on. And so I think the first round could be really close here. Yeah, and Shady, I do agree. Molina has the kicks. If he can slow Zuma Gulov down some with those, with the way that he builds through a fight, I think he could really take over in the second and especially the third round. And so that's where, for me, the things that I like on this fight, I'll see what the line is on the over 1.5 for that safer parlay. That's not something you're going to want to bet straight up. I'm sure the line's, it's maybe even too shitty for me to use in a parlay. I think fight goes the distance isn't a bad look. I think it's more likely than fight doesn't go the distance. But I also am a little bit interested in Molina round 3 here because of the way he builds, what Shady brought up with Molina's kicks. I think that there's a chance that Molina's able to put him away in round 3. And I do personally think that Molina's the right side here. And so while a lot of people like the value or whatever on Zuma Gulov, I think this is a jumping off point for Molina and should be another good win for him as he hopefully moves forward. I do like him overall as a fighter. Oh, the one other thing that I did think about here, I'll see what the line is, but I'd be interested potentially in the split decision here as well. If it does get to decision and Zuma Gulov wins round 1, the second round is somewhat close, and then Molina takes over and wins the third, I think there's a chance we get a split decision here as well. So if the line is good, I don't hate that either. Shady saying Molina survived round 1 with Silva with that pressure, took over second round. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing that could happen here as well. Molina decision 115. Again, I definitely don't mind that. KO 420. Shady's hit. If look at the comments, Shady's hitting us with a lot of good information here. And I think the round 3 line should be pretty good too. I'll have to go look up what that is, but I'll definitely consider that. All right, next up we have Munoz versus Gravely. This one is really pretty straightforward in terms of what people are saying on each side. Munoz is a jiu-jitsu player. He likes to be on his back. He'll even pull guard at times. He's going to be looking for the submission. He's going to be looking to go to the mat, though his wrestling is not very strong, so the chances of him ending up on top in this matchup are not incredibly good, but that he is dangerous from his back on the ground, and so Gravely is going to have to be careful throughout this fight to not get subbed. On the Gravely side, kind of the opposite. So Gravely is a wrestler. He's good at getting people to the mat. He's good at getting some top control. His striking has been kind of okay in the UFC. Not phenomenal, but okay. And so really this matchup is pretty straightforward from most of the analysts that I've listened to or the cappers. It's either Munoz by sub or Gravely likely by decision by getting that top control. I would say that the consent, a couple other things that people are saying that I do think have some need to be said here. Munoz has not shown himself to be very good on the feet. And so while Gravely's best path here is probably to get top position and grind out Munoz over the course of the rounds, he probably does have an advantage here, especially in terms of volume on the feet. And so that's another way that he could potentially win rounds even without going to the ground. The one issue Gravely is going to have to watch is that he does put himself into dangerous spots, especially when he's going for takedowns in terms of getting choked. And so he is going to have to be careful. And this is what people said, and I agree with this. Like when you go in for those takedowns, you've got to really execute well to not end up in a submission attempt from somebody who's got a really strong jiu-jitsu game. In terms of the consensus on this one, it was Gravely, but I would say probably 65%. So there were 35% of people who were on Munoz here and definitely on Munoz by sub. Most of the people on Gravely were on Gravely by decision. Not really any outliers because this was split a little bit. In terms of my take on this one, This again reminds me of that Cortez and Gato fight from a couple fight cards ago, where Gato had the really good jiu-jitsu game off her back. She was dangerous. People were saying, you got to watch. I mean, this was women's MMA. You got to watch for the arm bars from guard. You got to watch for other sub attempts. But if Cortez can just get top position and ride her out, she should be able to cruise to a decision. This fight feels very similar to that to me. I think you do have to take seriously the possibility of Munoz getting a submission, or at least getting submission attempts. But I also think that Gravely has the better path to victory on the feet, and that he absolutely can get top position and stay out of trouble on the ground. It's just not going to be sweat free, is what I would say. So I on this one am going to go on the Gravely side. I went on the Cortez side in that Cortez versus Gatto fight for the same reasons. I think the chance of winning round striking or getting top position and being able to ride that out is a lot better look than hoping that someone gets a submission. So Eileen Gravely and Eileen the overs here. Shady's saying is fight is juiced to under 3 rounds. Let's see. Yeah, under 2.5 is minus 133 here. I actually don't hate that over 2.5 at plus 100 right now. I think there's a decent chance that this fight goes all the way to decision. So to get over 2.5 at even money, I haven't done it yet, but that's something I might look at as a straight bet in this one. Because I was already, and man, with that line for that at over 2.5, I think there's a good chance I'll look at an over 1.5 for the safe parlay here. And then in the long shot parlay, I'll probably be using Gravely by decision for that. Because I think to me, that feels like the most likely outcome actually here. I think Shady's on that as well. Yeah, he says Gravely decision. Gravely 3-to-1 ratio on fight experience. Agreed. Gravely has more experience in the UFC. And I think, while he's not I don't think he's phenomenal. Like, there will probably be spots that I fade him in the future. I do think that he's good enough. And so I like him in this one. All right, next up we have Stolze and Saint Denis. Saint Denis is most well known for the life-changing beating he took against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos 6 months ago. Everybody who talks about this fight brings that up, and it's actually the main thing that people talk about. When they talk about what Saint Denis does well or why he would win this fight, I heard a couple people talk about his grappling, and if you look back at his record, he does have a lot of wins by submission. And so I think that is a place where he is likely to have an advantage in this fight. But at the same time, the thing that people will say his best characteristic is that he's durable. And I think it was Dan from, oh shit, why is the name escaping me? Oh, I'll say it when it comes to me. But anyway, Dan was saying this week, any fighter where durability is their main skill, you probably don't want to bet on them too often. And I think that's probably something to consider here. In terms of Stolze, it's funny because most people will actually say that he's not really phenomenal anywhere, that his striking is okay and has been getting better. But most people will say they're not even sure that he should be in the UFC and that he may not be there for very long. The reason that I think that that's kind of funny is that the consensus picks on this fight for the people that I've listened to, it's Stolze and Stolze by decision. People are off of Saint Denis. They don't like that beating he took, and they don't like that it was just 6 months ago. They didn't really see anything to take away from that fight. And so that was a pretty overwhelming consensus, actually. In terms of outliers, I think, I can't remember who it was now, but there was one person who was on Saint Denis. Man, my take here, so this is a tough one because earlier in the week, I was thinking Stolze would be the side here and that I would be on him, partly because he's the dog. I mean, plus 135 now. I actually think the odds were better on him earlier in the week. I'd have to double check that. But the more that I look at this fight and look back at their records, I'm not sure Stolze has much on the mat, and so I'm a little concerned with all the submissions that Saint Denis has in his record. If he is able to get this fight to the ground, I think he actually might have an advantage there. And the way that he fought through that fight with Dos Santos, I mean, it was bad, and the fight should have been stopped for sure. And you never know after a beating like that if he's going to be able to come back with the same kind of durability and fight. But man, he kept coming forward and he kept fighting. And I think if he can do that here, he's taking on someone who's a much lower level than Zaleski dos Santos was. And so I don't think that this is like a great spot for Stolze or Stoltz. I don't know. My German might not be the best. So, and so on this one, I actually think that I'm leaning toward Saint Denis. Also like Saint Denis by sub. I think that that could be a good spot. I don't know about, I was thinking also about fight doesn't go to decision, but as durable as Saint Denis was in that last fight, and the fact that Stolze, I don't think will have the same kind of power that Dos Santos did, I'm not sure that Stolze can get him out of there. I could see him potentially winning a decision here if it's a striking match, but I really don't think he probably gets him out of there. So I don't have a strong pick on the inside the distance or fight goes to decision, but definitely leaning towards Saint Denis and Saint Denis by sub. And maybe even like round 2 or 3 for that as well. I don't think this fight will be over extremely quickly. Shady also saying fade the German. Maybe, yeah, live bet, not a bad idea. If Stolze can come out and have a good first round, maybe you end up even getting a little bit of plus money on Saint Denis. So I don't mind that at all. I think that's a good call. All right, this next one we can go pretty quick. We got the Leech. Jackson against the short notice replacement, Argueta. I mean, how much is there to say here? You've got Damon Jackson, who has been fighting well, especially as of late. I think really showing something. I think he's got some potential to even give some better fighters some trouble. And he's fighting a guy who just went to split decision on May 6th in LFA. So 1 month ago. And I believe that was a 5-round fight, pretty hard fought. So he's coming back a month later. We talk about how bad it was for Saint Denis to come back 6 months later off a beating. Argueta's beating wasn't the same, but he's coming back a month later, and he's coming in on short notice. So I don't think that that's a good spot for him. Also, 5 of his 8 wins are on the ground, sub or ground and pound. It's hard for me to think that he's able to do any of that against Jackson. So you're also taking away what's probably his best weapon. Yeah. In terms of the consensus here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. It's Jackson and Jackson inside the distance. There were no outliers. Nobody thinks Argueta could. Well, I mean, the only way people say Argueta could win this is what they always say, which is he comes in, gets lucky to land a bomb on Jackson, and gets lucky to land a bomb on Jackson, and that's the way that he wins. My take here, no different than anybody else. I think it's Jackson inside the distance, and even Jackson round 1 I like pretty well. I want to see what the line is on that. Shady says Jackson's moving up 15 pounds. I had not heard that, so I'll have to check into that. I mean, that's kind of not something that you want to see necessarily, but I still think the short notice nature and the quality of opponent here, I just don't fear it too much. The line's so wide now. I earlier this week parlayed Jackson and Molina and got plus money between the two of them. But Jackson has gotten steamed up now minus 525. I mean, I don't think there's any point in betting that. I will probably in the parlays. Oh, Shady, thank you for the clarification. Argueta's going up 15 pounds, not Jackson. Oh man, just another. I mean, holy shit! Like this should be a killing. I like that Jackson round 1, honestly, unless he plays with his food. I feel like he should be able to put him away in round 1. For that reason, too, in the parlays, I'll definitely be using fight doesn't go the distance here. I think fight doesn't go the distance is a good look, period. The under 2.5 is juiced to minus 147 at this point, but I don't hate it. I mean, I think Jackson's very likely to get him out of there pretty quickly. If Argueta is going to hit that like 3% chance of winning, he's probably going to pop Jackson in the first round and put him out, which again, I don't think that's happening, but just saying if it did, it would probably be quick enough. So I really like the unders there. And I like Jackson round 1 inside the distance. All right, next up, Daniel, you say, is this our favorite? Man, I'd have to look back. I would say that the under on this fight is definitely one of my favorites. I also do like the under in Fak Radinoff Michailidis. Those are probably the 2 so far that I like the most. And I will say, I know Shady's he's not talking right now, but I think he likes Gravely decision quite a bit, which I definitely can't blame him for. So yeah, I would say for me personally, the under 2.5 in Jackson Argueta is my favorite spot. Or Jackson inside the distance, either of those. All right. Next up, we got Selecki and De Silva. Both of these guys like to grapple. Really, this again, honestly, this was something I felt this week when I was listening. Like, I really respect the guys that I listen to during the week. I hope I make that clear. They do a lot of hard work, more work than I do with tape study and all that stuff, though I'm starting to do more. But this week, it just felt like the takes weren't quite as in depth. And maybe that's because the fights are a little bit more straightforward, but there just wasn't as much color on the analysis for most of these fights as I feel like there normally is. So part of the reason I'm going through these quick is I feel like there just wasn't as much this week. But really, it's Selecki's better at grappling, or most people believe that he's better at grappling. He's been participating in a lot of grappling tournaments. That's what he likes to go to. Not going to be amazing on the feet. I even wrote down here, honestly, it felt like no one really knew what to do with this fight. Not a lot of hot takes beyond Selecki being good on the mat. So again, and Shady, if you have a take here, do jump in the chat and tell me what you like. But the consensus on this one was definitely Selecki and Selecki by submission. I would say Outliers, maybe 20% were on De Silva. And he's at plus 145. That was part of the reason, is that he's at plus money. My take on this, definitely probably way down in terms of the confidence I have on any of these fights. This is one that'll be down near the bottom of my parlays. When I look back, I haven't been very impressed by Selecki, actually. When I first looked through these fights, I leaned toward fading him off the bat. But I mean, I honestly don't know enough about De Silva. I watched a little bit. It doesn't tell me enough to feel like I know that I should take him, and I didn't feel like other people had a strong take other than he's plus money. Maybe Selecki's not great. So, in the parlay, I won't bet this straight, but I think Selecki decision or maybe a third round sub for the parlays is what I'm looking at. Yeah, that's where I'm at on this one. Shady says not paying the price, easy skip, not playing the dog either. That's where I'm at. Also, just not strong takes here. Shit, I rambled on that. Sorry. My bad. All right. We'll stop doing that. Next up, we got Felice Herrig and Kolakiewicz. This is a fight that is a rematch in terms of what people are saying here. A lot of people thought that Herrig would win the first time around. Kolakiewicz had better output and was able to stuff takedowns, didn't get stuck on the mat for too long. Since then, both of these women have gotten older and not gotten better. Herrig has fought, I think, 3 times since then, had 2 knee surgeries, and lots of people talk about the fact that she posts feet pictures on OnlyFans. Apparently that's her deal, which, fine. Probably makes some money that way. Kolakiewicz on the other side has had, I believe she's on a 6-fight losing streak, so she has definitely stayed more active and seems to have been training harder and with a better camp, but is on a pretty bad losing streak, though most of those fights are to pretty good fighters. And so most of them are not, most of those losses aren't horrendous, I guess you would say. But both of these women now, I believe 36 years old, on the back end of their careers. Herrig doesn't seem to have been training that hard, though you can't know for sure. Kolakiewicz seems to still be taking it seriously, but it just hasn't been performing well in recent history. That's basically what people are saying overall in this fight, and also why the hell did the UFC rebook this? That's the other thing. In terms of the consensus on this one, it's Kolakiewicz. I actually heard almost no one on Herrig for this fight. Outliers, yeah, surprisingly not really any. And my take, Shady can vouch for this. When I sent him a few plays I liked early in the week, I've been on Kolakiewicz since early with this one. I think she has the better skill set. I think that she's stayed more active, and I think that that'll play out here. I don't see any reason for this fight to turn out incredibly differently than the first one, other than maybe Kolakiewicz winning by a little bit wider margin. She is all the way down to plus 100 now, was plus 120, maybe 125 a little bit earlier. So money's definitely been coming in on her, and I can understand why. I also don't mind Kolakiewicz by decision. I think that is definitely the most likely way that this fight ends. So I will be taking Kolakiewicz for the parlays and then probably Kolakiewicz decision. Next up, the fight that has had the most drama on it this week, which is Menefield versus Mazarov. If you haven't heard about it, just go look up an article and read this. It's kind of interesting stuff. Mazarov has changed his name in order to distance himself from some losses early on in his career and said that he's a different person. It's not even the same person. He had people from his team writing into SureDog to try to say that some of his losses never happened and it wasn't him. It's pretty crazy. Like the shit hit the fan for real on this one. So they've even changed his record coming into this fight. In terms of the actual fighters and what to expect here, the consensus here is people don't really like either of these fighters very much. People are definitely saying Mazarov is a bum. Some of the reasons that they will say this is they say he has 2 or 3 minutes and then he gasses. And also, if he gasses, that he will tap to anything. A lot of people have referenced a fight. I couldn't find it, so I didn't see it. But apparently he got taken down to the ground, 2 shots, and he tapped out to strikes after 2 shots on the ground. So this isn't a guy who's going to hang in there if he gets himself into a bad position. On the other side, people definitely don't trust Alonzo Menefield either. He is not someone that people want to put their money on, but he does at least have UFC experience, and he at least has some skills that he should be able to put to use in this fight. That is what most people will say. Consensus here is definitely Menefield, and then the under. It under 1.5 is all the way to -233. So that's pretty much unbettable at this point. You could put that in a parlay, but yeah, people are expecting this fight to end and end quickly. Not really any outliers. Everybody on Menefield and this fight to finish fast. In terms of my take here, this is one where I actually did go back and watch some of Mazarov's fights. And granted, they're against nobodies. So you have to take stuff with a grain of salt. But I wanted to at least see the way that he fought. And he actually wasn't quite as crazy in the fights that I watched as I thought he would be, given the way that people described him. He did definitely come out and put the pressure on people, but he wasn't like just swinging wildly and crashing the pocket without any technique. So don't get me wrong. That's not to say that he's a good fighter, and I don't think he wins this fight by any means. But it is to say, made up record or not, he did have some okay striking technique right at the beginning of the fight, and he definitely liked to push the pressure. The one fight I saw, man, he threw a spinning back kick that hit the guy right in the eye socket. It was brutal. So I mean, Menefield's not necessarily known for his defense, and so I think if he can hit Menefield with something like that, there is a possibility that he could win. But if he doesn't do it fast, he's losing this fight, and it's much more likely that Menefield wins. So what I did on this one is on BetMGM, I took Mazarov to win in 60 seconds for plus 1,600, and I just put like 0.2 units on it, very low. Then FanDuel, and I don't know what the line will be now, but this was 2 days ago. I took Menefield to win in round 1 or 2 at plus 100. So I think that that's a pretty good combination in my book, because I think that Mazarov's path to victory is a quick finish. Could it be in 65 seconds? Sure. But that plus 1,600 line was just big enough that I thought that was worth the risk. And then I do think Menefield does win in round 1 or 2, most likely. So that at plus 100, I think, was a good line. Okay, let's see. Shady says, got Menefield at minus 155, Steam to minus 200. Yeah, it's gone up even more because of all this drama that's happened. It's up to minus 250 now. So it's really gotten steamed up. 10 first round losses, 7 KO, 3 sub. Yeah, this is just a fight that should finish fast. I think that's enough to say about that. I will also look at Menefield by sub. He has quite a few submissions. And if Mazarov just goes to the ground, gets knocked down, I could see Menefield getting down there and either pounding him out or getting a submission. So I think that's worth a look. This would be another spot that I would say that I do like. I mean, it's really juiced, but in a parlay, even the under 1.5, I think it's a good spot. Next up, we got Osborne versus Adashev. In terms of what people say on this one, actually, again, a little bit disappointed or just wishing for more from people on this fight, but people do talk about Osborne being a good athlete, a good striker, fairly rangy, able to keep distance pretty well most of the time, decent power. The one thing people question is whether his cardio will hold up across 3 rounds. On the Adashev side, people talk about him being a cleaner striker than Osborne, but not necessarily a crisper or stronger striker. Pretty good all-around fighter, definitely capable of putting up some resistance. For Osborne, I'm trying to find, I don't know where this fight went. I hope the fight's still on. I don't see it on BetStamp, so hopefully it's still happening. Anyway, I did watch some of these guys too. I'll talk about that in a minute when I talk about my take. The consensus here was Osborne, but it was barely Osborne. I would say it was 60 to 65% on Osborne, 35 to 40% wanting to take that shot on Adashev. In terms of my take on this fight, went back and watched some of these guys, and honestly, I think Osborne is pretty impressive. I like the way that he keeps distance. I like the way that he's active, able to move in and out quickly. I think his striking is pretty crisp. I think he's really athletic. Now, the possibility of him gassing out, I suppose it's there, but I also saw him fight through what looked like some tiredness and continue to fight and fight well. So I think this is actually a good spot for Osborne. I think Adashev is a decent all-around fighter, but I don't think he's on Osborne's level. And so I think this is a good spot. Yeah, Shady says an 8-inch reach advantage for Osborne. That's what I'm saying. He's tall for the division, and I didn't realize his reach advantage was that big. But I just think he's going to be able to pick away at Adashev from distance and just do some damage. So for me, I like Osborne. I like Osborne inside the distance or KO as well. I think it's very likely that he gets this done without going to a decision. So those are the things that I'll be on here. And actually, this is a fight I feel pretty decent about. I think Ode could be on the way up a little bit. I'm not saying like, title contention or something, but just continuing to move up to better competition. All right, this is a long one. There's 14 fights on this card. So going quick, but we still got 4 left. We'll bust through these next couple and then spend a little time on the last 2. So next up, we have Silva versus Patella. This is another women's fight. Silva coming off the Contender Series win in the 2nd round. Went back and watched that fight. I'll talk about that in a minute. Patella, UFC veteran, has been kind of just a steady, okay, average UFC fighter. Silva is still 28 years old. This is what people talk about. Could be improving. Feel like she's pretty athletic, good striker, pretty good all-around UFC game. A lot of people were impressed by her Contender Series win. I was a little less impressed than some other people were, but people were impressed. On the Patella side, she used to fight at 115. This fight, I believe, is at 120, 125. Shady will probably know. He'll tell me. But so, a little bit heavier in terms of that. In terms of the consensus on this one, I would say it was pretty even. There were a lot of people on Patella, but there were a few people. I feel like the people who were on Silva were high on Silva. Half the Battle. That's the podcast, Dan's podcast I was looking for earlier. The guest on Half the Battle this week, this was like his strongest play was Silva, and even Silva inside the distance here. But I would say that it was probably 60% on the Patella side. And she is still plus 105, so a little bit of a dog here, not much. When I went back and watched Silva's Contender Series fight, she was fighting a woman from China who was very short. I think she was like an Olympic weightlifter or something, or a power lifter. And she was strong and she moved okay, but man, the size difference was absolutely massive. And what I was amazed by is how her opponent was able to get into the pocket and deliver some tough shots. I just was shocked that she was able to do that with how much of a reach advantage Silva had. So yes, Silva ended up getting a submission in the 2nd round, but I actually was not incredibly impressed by that fight. It felt like one where she should have absolutely dominated, and I didn't feel like she absolutely dominated. So yeah, there's some potential there, but I was less impressed than many other people were. So on this fight, I actually do like Patella here, especially at the dog. I mean, it's small dog odds, but dog odds. There is one angle too that Clint from Die Hard MMA likes to look at, and that is the Contender Series fade. And I know that these things can be a little gimmicky, but this one I think is kind of worthwhile. And that is when somebody's coming in off the Contender Series and they're fighting an established UFC veteran and they're a favorite. That's a good time to look to fade them. And I think that's been a good strategy many times, and that would be the case here. So I'll probably have a small bet on Patella. I should have made it already, but was trying to lock in what I wanted to do. But even at plus 105, I could see myself doing at least like half a unit on her. Next up, we have Tresano versus Almeida. I think this could actually be an interesting fight, maybe low-key fun fight on this card. In terms of what people say here, people definitely have a lot of respect for Tresano. His striking, really strong boxer, pretty good on the feet. The concern for most people is that he can be pretty low volume. And so because of that, he can even potentially be losing rounds, even if he's the better striker, because he's just not active enough. He does have the UFC experience. Almeida's another one, I believe, coming in off the Contender Series. So Tresano's a big favorite here. That's the difference. He's minus 225. So this is obviously not a place where he's a dog. On the Almeida side, people just look at him as somewhat unreliable, and they're not sure what to expect from him yet. Though he does have some decent striking and some decent pressure. Some people were concerned that he might gas, but this is one of those spots where you just don't know yet. Like he could, but you just don't know. In terms of the consensus on this one, it was Tresano. Most people think that he'll win by decision. I would say maybe 20% were on Almeida here. In terms of my take, so this is another one where I don't feel incredibly strongly about this one. I have liked Mike Tresano okay, though thinking and looking back on his fights, the lack of volume does concern me. I don't like to bet on fighters who are low volume, especially if I think the fight is going to go to decision. This goes back to that fight earlier with Jeff Molina, where part of the reason that I want to be on him is that if it does go to decision, I think he's the better side to have because he'll have better volume. The same could potentially be true here with Almeida. I just think in this spot, it's much less known. We just don't know what to expect from him as much. So I will look at overs for this fight, and the fight goes the distance even potentially. Let's see, that line right now, the over 2.5 is minus 182. So it is a little bit juiced, but don't be surprised if you see that show up in my parlays. And I actually am also considering, again, just a half unit shot in Almeida. I think that he has enough potential. And again, with that low volume from Tresano, I think at plus 190, it's not a terrible spot. So this is not a place where I would invest much, but I may end up with a half unit there. We'll see. I'll put that stuff on BetStamp, by the way, if you want to know what I'm betting. Other than the parlays, those I just post on Twitter. Too much shit to do to enter that on BetStamp. Too much work. All right, we got 2 fights left. Next up, Dan Ige and, as Shady calls him, the Russian, Movsar Evloev. In terms of what people say on this fight, it is pretty unanimous. That is on the Dan Ige side. He is durable. He's a good MMA fighter, well-rounded. People have a ton of respect for him. Been taking on some of the best guys in the game. And also, most people don't think he is one of the top guys in the division. On the Evloev side, people are super high on him. A lot of people, including myself, wish that his fight with Topuria had gone off. After that last fight from Topuria, I'm not sure who would have won that. But people are super high on Evloev. They absolutely love his wrestling. If you hear somebody who breaks his fight down well and is able to describe all the different things that he does in the wrestling game, it is incredibly impressive. He's just a relentless wrestler who doesn't give up. Now, he does tend to go to decision. People talk about that as well. He doesn't really have like finishing power for the most part, though he will stay active when he's on top of people. And Ige has been pretty durable. And so the likelihood of him getting finished when Evloev hasn't been able to finish previous opponents is unlikely. Okay, in terms of the consensus here, it's definitely Evloev and Evloev by decision. Outliers, though, if you, I mean, I know I've only been doing this like 4 weeks, but if you've been listening, you know I have a ton of respect for Dan Tom and his Protect Your Neck podcast. He's a former fighter and just really sees a lot of things clearly. Now, he said at the beginning of his breakdown on this fight, and I'm going to cover what he said in a little bit more detail because I thought it was at least important to bring to the table. So he said at the beginning that he really likes Dan Ige. I think has maybe a little bit of a relationship with him, but more so with his coach, Eric Nixick. Loves that fight camp, loves the coaching. And he actually is going with Dan Ige in this spot. And that always catches my attention to at least listen to why. So his sense here is that while Evloev is very good and a very good wrestler, that he hasn't faced anyone the level of Ige, and that Ige is really good with his counters, and that Evloev on his level changes does leave himself open to left uppercuts and also potentially to knees. And he thinks that Ige is going to have a chance to use one of those to even put Evloev out. And again, he did say at the beginning that was a bent that he had ahead of time. So I went back and watched some of the fights from Evloev because I think I had seen one of his fights, but just didn't remember the way he fought very much. And damn, it's impressive. I mean, you go watch this guy and he just never, ever, ever stops going after the takedowns. The ways that he gets people up against the fence, single leg, double leg, grabbing the ankles to pull those out. And again, I know that I'm not a wrestler, so I don't know all, I'm learning. I don't know all the terminology, but like, just go watch the fight and the like sneaky and inventive ways that he continues to take people to the ground. They start to get back up. He just takes them back down. That kind of a relentless wrestling, I just think beats most people unless they're just very top level. I'm not saying that they're the same guy, but it's like with Makhachev, he's just going to keep coming and keep taking you down. And I think Evloev's wrestling is relentless like that. So I do think Evloev's the side here. As Shady already said, it's gone from 300 to I have it at 400 still on BetMGM. The decision, he says, is up to minus 200. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this fight yet in terms of parlays. I mean, I don't like to bet things that big straight up. So I may just take like fight goes the distance or something. Well, the over 2.5 is minus 417. That's not going to work either. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing with betting this fight, but I do expect Evloev to win here and put on another display. Gotta share this comment. Shady says, Russian Bear, Oso Peligroso. I love Oso Peligroso. That is a sweet, sweet nickname. All right. Last up, we have the main event with Volkov and Rosenstrike. This, again, is fairly straightforward in terms of what people are saying because these fighters have fairly consistent paths to victory. So Volkov is a pretty good kickboxer. I mean, he is a good kickboxer. Good at range, kicks, punches, distance control. People talk about how his defensive wrestling has gotten better over the years, though I don't think that should matter too much in this fight. And so for Volkov, the way that he wins this fight in terms of what most people talk about is accrued damage over time. And that could lead to a KO in the 4th, 5th round if he's able to pile up enough damage. But a lot of people also think that if Volkov wins, it goes to decision. On the other side, you have Rozenstruik, who is a power puncher. People talk about how he is generally low volume and looks for the one big punch. But if he lands that big punch, he tends to put people out. In some ways, a little bit like Derek Lewis in that way. I don't think they're really exactly the same fighter, but they both just have that death touch where if they touch you right, you're going down. On this one, I actually really like what, and Shady, I don't remember, I think you said this in your video that you posted on Twitter, but I think a big thing here is to go and look at who Rozenstruik has lost to. He lost to Blades, to Gane, and to Ngannou. I mean, how is anybody going to fault him for any of those wins? If Blades doesn't get put to sleep, you've got probably the best grappler in the heavyweight division, gone, incredibly athletic, in and out movement, until he got taken down by Ngannou, looked like he was going to be the world champion. And then Ngannou, I mean, none of those losses are things that I think can be held against Rozenstruik. Okay, I'm getting into what I think here. Consensus. The consensus is actually Volkov and Volkov decision here. Outlier, and I would say that's about 70%. And then the outliers, 30%, I would say, are on Rozenstruik. And definitely, probably every single person who is on Rozenstruik thinks that he's going to win by KO. So my take here, I actually am a little concerned that Volkov might be on the way down from the top of the mountain for his career. I mean, this fight I think is a really important one for him because after and granted, like losing to Tom Aspinall is no shame either if we're going to talk about who people have lost to, because I think Tom Aspinall is a great fighter. But Volkov just hasn't looked good even in the losses. And so I'm afraid like he's looked kind of slow to me, kind of plodding. And if that's the case, I think Rozenstruik ends up putting him away. Yes, he's low volume at times, but 5 rounds is a long time for him to be able to land that big shot that can put Volkov away. I also think at some point, you know, maybe people just don't change, but Rozenstruik has to know that to climb up in this division, he's got to win, and that if he loses every single minute and only relies on like a punch here or there, he's going to lose too often. And so I'm interested to see if he'll at least fight a little bit more aggressively in this fight. I'm not saying he goes crazy by any means, but if he does try to blitz him a few times a little more, try to land that big shot. And so I'm going to be on Rozenstruik by KO here. I'm thinking about some of the round props, but it's just hard to know when, because he could land that shot at any time, right? So it's hard to say when that would be. All right, that is the 14 fight card. Daniel, Shady, appreciate you guys in the chat. Shady bringing all kinds of good info. Always appreciate that, man. I will be posting for anybody watching this now or watching the replay, I'll be posting my straight up bets and small parlays on BetStamp at Big Tasty Picks. And then I will post the latter parlays probably tomorrow morning on Twitter. So hopefully we can go make some money this weekend, and we'll be able to come back with a little more green in our pocket. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you on Twitter.